The snow was 3 days old and crusted hard with ice when a bare foot pressed down into it in the dark. No boots, no torch, no sound, just a girl who could not speak, building a lie out of wolf tracks, one frozen print at a time. Somewhere in the black birches, 200 enemies were already moving toward the valley, following a trail she had laid for them. A trail that ended at the edge of a ravine. They thought they were hunting easy prey. They had no idea they were being hunted by the one creature nobody in that house had ever bothered to see. She had saved them all before, 3 times, in silence, in the cold. But this time, walking home with her feet bleeding, she made one small mistake. She left a trail of her own, and something was already following it. The snow was 3 days old, and it had learned to hold a shape. Wren pressed her bare foot down into it, slow, letting the cold climb up through her ankle and settle somewhere behind her knee, like a small animal making a nest. She held her weight there. She waited until the print was deep enough to fool a tracker who knew what he was looking at. Then she lifted her foot and studied the mark she had left. Too clean. A real wolf dragged its claws at the edge. So she leaned down, scratched 4 thin lines into the leading edge with 2 fingers, blew the loose ice away, and moved forward to make the next one. Behind her, the valley lay silent. Somewhere in the pale birches to the north, a hunting party from the Blackthorn clan was picking its way down a deer trail that did not know it was a lie. The trail would lead them past a low stand of pines, around a slope, and straight to the lip of a ravine she had spent 4 nights dressing in branches and fresh powder. They thought they were following a wounded elk. They were following her. She had built this the way she built everything, print by print, drag mark by drag mark, in the blue dark when the rest of the pack slept warm and fed inside the great house. She knew the ravine better than anyone alive. She had fallen into it herself, 2 winters back, running from a man who caught her taking scraps from the compost. 16 feet of loose shale and frozen mud. She had set her own broken wrist with a stick and a strip torn from her shirt, because no healer in Greywater would spend a single breath on a mute Omega who could not even shift. So she had stopped expecting breath from anyone. She had learned instead to read the ground. Every wolf in the pack left a signature she could feel in her bones, the way one paw turned inward, the way another never fully drew in its claws, always half ready to strike. The careful, deliberate weight of the old ones. She knew them all, and she could forge any of them. Not just the shape of a wolf, the shape of a particular wolf, on a particular night, in a particular hurry. That was her secret. Not a hidden bloodline. Not a sleeping power, just a strange, exact thing her hands could do that no one had ever thought to look for. She finished the last print and sat back on her heels. Her toes had gone the color of old candle wax. She tucked them under her thighs and pulled the wool tighter around her shoulders. It smelled of mildew and sheep fat, because before it was hers, it had been a blanket in the barn, and before that, it had belonged to a sheep. The pack gave its Omegas 1 garment a year. This year, hers had been a single linen shift, so thin she could read a page through it. So she had taken the blanket. It was the warmest thing she owned. 3 times now she had saved this pack like this. 3 times, and not one of them knew. She could not tell them. She could not tell anyone anything. Her tongue had been taken at the root before she was old enough to keep the memory of her own voice. Not by an enemy, but by the old mother of Greywater, a woman named Vesper, long dead now, who had decided that a wolfless girl had no business making sound in a house of shifters. What remained was a smooth hollow where words went to die. She could hum. She could grunt. She could make one high, thin note that was neither a howl nor a scream, but something lost between them. It was the loneliest sound she had ever made, so she had stopped making it. What she made instead were trails, and tonight she had made a beautiful one. She should have erased her own tracks on the way home. She knew that. She always knew that. But her feet were bleeding, and her hands would not stop shaking, and the cold had gotten into her thinking the way it gets into a hinge, and she walked back to the kitchen door in the dark, leaving a line of small bare human footprints across the snow. A line that began at the most careful piece of forgery in the northern hills, and ended at the door beneath the stairs where she slept. She did not think of it again. She should have. Far to the north, on a ridge where the wind came off the high country with teeth in it, a man stood very still and breathed in. Roan Vance had been tracking something for 3 days, and he could not have told his own riders what. His wolf had caught it first. A thread of scent on a border patrol, faint as smoke off a snuffed candle, and the animal inside him had gone rigid in a way it never did. His wolf did not whimper. His wolf had killed men and wolves, and had not so much as flinched, but it had made a low, breaking sound that he felt in his back teeth. And then it had turned south and refused to turn back. So he had followed. Now he crouched at the edge of a stand of birches and looked at the snow, and something cold and clean moved through his chest. There were 2 trails here. One was wolf sign, beautiful wolf sign, so precise it made the hair rise on his arms, because he had trackers who had followed prey across half the world, and not one of them could have laid down a line like this. Whoever made it understood weight and stride and fear the way a musician understands silence between notes. It was not a trail, it was a sentence, and at the end of it, he already knew, would be a trap. The other trail was nothing like it. Small, bare, human, bleeding near the end. He set 2 fingers beside one of those small prints and held them there, and his wolf rose up under his skin and pressed against the inside of his ribs like an animal trying to get out. Cedar, his wolf told him. Cedar and cold, and something underneath that he had no word for. He had never taken a mate. The stories said his wolf was too savage, that no female would survive the bond. He had let people believe that, because it was easier than the truth, which was simpler and worse. He had simply never found a single thing in the world worth keeping. Until now. He looked at the 2 trails running side by side, the masterwork and the wounded barefoot line. And the thing that turned over in his chest was not hunger, exactly, though there was hunger in it. It was grief. Whoever walked here had built the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen with their bare hands in the freezing dark, and then walked home, bleeding, alone, leaving a trail no one had ever bothered to read. He stood. Where? He thought. And the word came up from somewhere far below the place where thought usually lived. Where is she? 2 mornings later, The kitchen of the Greywater house was loud with the smell of soap and old blood. Wren stood at the wash tub, scrubbing pink water out of training leathers, her knuckles cracked open and stinging where the lye found every split in her skin. A bowl sat untouched on the corner of the table, thin broth, 3 lentils at the bottom, sunk and still. She had counted them. She always counted them. She felt it before she heard it. A vibration through the stone floor, up through the soles of her feet, into her shins. Hooves, many of them. And under the hooves, something that was not sound at all, but pressure. The way the air goes heavy and strange before a storm breaks. Across the room, the cook went still with the spoon in her hand. 2 younger Omegas folding linens by the hearth stopped breathing. The front doors of the house swung open on their own, and the wind that came through smelled of cedar and of hot iron and of snow. Wren's hands stopped moving in the gray water. Boot steps in the corridor. No, not boots. Bare feet. Enormous, deliberate, unhurried. The steps of something that had never once in its life needed to run from anything. The kitchen door drifted inward with a small, low creak, and a man too tall for the frame ducked his head and filled it. His eyes found the cook, who dropped at once to her knees. They found the 2 girls already on the floor. Then they crossed the room, and they found her. And Wren, who had not been seen by anyone in 19 years, was seen. He breathed in. Something cracked across his face, like ice on a river in spring. And in a voice that arrived in her chest without passing through her ears, low as the roots of the hills, he said one word: mate. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Mate. And everything went out from it in rings. Her hands came up out of the wash tub without her deciding to move them, and pink water ran off her wrists and spattered the stone floor. And somewhere far away, a part of her braced for the blow that always came when she made a mess. The blow did not come. Nothing came except the man. And the slow, enormous thing waking up inside her own chest. It had no business being there. She had no wolf. She had never had a wolf. Her whole life had been built on that single hard fact, like a house built on a flat gray rock. And yet, something was turning over behind her ribs now, stretching after a long sleep, pressing outward as if it had been folded up inside her for years, and had only now remembered it had a shape. She could smell him. She should not have been able to smell anything over the lye and the blood and the wet wool. But she could. Cedar, not the soft, sweet cedar of a linen chest, the sharp kind, fresh split heartwood, the kind that stings the back of the throat, and under it, darker, something hot and metallic, like the air near a forge late at night. She breathed it in, and the buried weight behind her ribs leaned toward it. Across the kitchen, the cook was still on her knees. Her name was Della, and she had fed Wren thin broth every day for as long as Wren could remember, and now she stared at the floor as though the floor might tell her what to do. The 2 younger Omegas had not moved at all. The man crossed the room. He moved the way a slow landslide moves, without hurry, without doubt, with a kind of weight that made the idea of getting out of the way seem almost funny. He stopped close enough that she could see the pores of his skin and the thin white line through his lower lip where it had once been split and had healed crooked. He looked down at her hands, the cracked knuckles, the lie burns, the old pale scars circling both her wrists, where, last winter, a man had tied her to a post and left her there for 3 days because the unmated wolves complained about her scent during the season. Something moved in his jaw. A muscle jumped in the scarred column of his throat. "Who did this?" he said. It was not a question. None of his words seemed to be questions. They came up from too far down for that. Wren opened her mouth. She did not mean to. It was an old reflex, the way a person reaches for a railing that is not there. She opened her mouth, and the absence inside it was a thing he could see, a smooth, dark hollow where sound should have lived. And she watched understanding move across his face like the shadow of a cloud crossing a field. He turned his head a few degrees toward Della. "Her tongue," he said. "Who?" Della's voice came out cracked and small. "The old pack mother, Vesper. She has been dead a long time now." Roan did not look away from Wren, but he had stopped breathing for a moment, and when he started again, the breath shook on its way out, and the air around him changed temperature in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. He was reading her. She understood that suddenly, with a strange jolt of recognition. He was reading her the exact way she read tracks in the snow, going over every mark on her body and pulling the story out of it. The thinness, the scars, the careful way she held her weight, ready to flinch. He was looking at her and seeing the whole long winter of her life written into her skin. No one had ever looked at her like that. People looked through her, past her, over her head. They looked at the broth, not the girl drinking it. He looked at her as if she were the only legible thing in a room full of blank pages. "She weighs almost nothing," he said quietly, and it was not to anyone in particular. "Who has been feeding her?" Nobody answered. The answer was sitting in a bowl on the corner of the table, 3 lentils sunk in gray water, and everyone in the room knew it. Roan breathed out through his nose. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped another step, down into a register Wren felt in the small bones of her feet. "Bring me the alpha of this house," he said, "and the one who tied her." Then he did something she was not ready for. He reached up and unfastened the heavy cloak from his shoulders, a great dark thing of wolf fur lined with wool, and he swung it around her and settled it over her like a man covering something he had found half frozen on the road. The weight of it nearly took her knees out from under her. It was warm. It was warm with his body, and the heat sank straight through the thin linen and into her skin. And the feeling was so foreign, so completely outside anything she had words or wordlessness for, that her eyes filled before she could stop them. He saw it. Of course he saw it. He saw everything. His hand came up toward her face, and she flinched. It was not a choice. Her body had been taught one lesson very thoroughly, and the lesson was that a raised hand meant pain, and the body remembers what the mind would rather forget. She flinched, and he went absolutely still. His hand hung in the air an inch from her cheek. He did not close the distance. He did not pull back either. He simply held it there, motionless, the way a person holds a hand out to a wild thing that has every reason in the world not to trust it. And he waited. Inside Roan, the wolf was a wall of noise. It wanted to close that inch. It wanted to put its hand against her face and feel the warmth and the truth of her and never let a single cold thing near her again. It was straining at him, snarling low in the dark of him, and it was, for the first time in 9 years, completely certain of something. And that certainty was exactly what frightened him, because he knew what his wolf did to the things it was certain of. He had watched it. He had been 19, and the bond had risen in him like a flood with no banks, and the female it rose for had not survived what came after. The animal in him did not love gently. It loved the way fire loves dry grass. He had spent the years since keeping it caged, telling the world a story about savagery so that no one would come close enough to learn the real and smaller truth. That he did not trust himself to be near the thing he wanted most. So now, with his hand an inch from the most extraordinary face he had ever seen, he did the hardest thing he had done in years. He held still. He let her choose. He let the wolf scream, and he held his hand in the cold air between them, and he waited to see what she would do. Wren looked at his hand. It was enormous. The knuckles were scarred over old scars. There was a callus on the inside of the thumb that she knew, because she had the same one, from gripping things too hard for too long in the cold. She looked at the hand of the most dangerous creature she had ever stood beside, and she understood, in a way that went past thought, that it was not going to touch her unless she let it. That had never happened before, not once. Every hand in her life had simply arrived. She leaned forward. One small motion, a breath of distance closed. She tilted her cheek the last fraction of an inch and let it rest against his fingertips. The sound he made was not a word. It came from somewhere behind his breastbone, low and rolling, half a growl and half something she had no name for, because she had never in her life heard a sound aimed at her that meant you are mine to keep safe rather than you are mine to use. His fingers did not grab. They curved, gently, along the line of her cheek, and his thumb moved once, slow, over the sharp ridge of bone there, and she felt the heat of his hand and the slight, rough drag of the callus and the careful, deliberate restraint in every part of him, like a great wave holding itself just short of breaking. She closed her eyes. For one breath, in a kitchen that smelled of lye and old blood, wrapped in the warm weight of a stranger's cloak, with a stranger's scarred hand against her face, Wren let herself be touched on purpose. It lasted only a moment. Then boot steps came down the corridor, and the moment folded itself away, and his hand left her cheek so slowly that the cold rushed in after it like water filling a footprint. The doors of the great hall stood open, and beyond them the courtyard was full of riders. Wren had never seen so many wolves in one place, never seen horses so large, thick-necked beasts bred to carry the weight of a shifter, their breath rising in white columns into the cold. The riders sat in a silence that was its own kind of language, and at their head, a woman with steel-colored hair braided tight against her skull swung down from the saddle the moment she saw Roan come through the doors with his hand resting light at the small of Wren's back. The woman took in everything in a single sweep: the cloak, the bare feet, the hand, the face. "My king," she said. "Lieutenant Dawes," Roan answered. "Find a room in this house with a fire and a door that locks. Then the healer." The lieutenant's eyes moved to Wren again, weighing, not unkind. "And the pack alpha," Roan went on. "Detain him, and the one called Halden." Dawes did not blink. "What are the charges?" Roan looked down at Wren. She was shaking. She could not tell anymore whether it was the cold or the fear, or the great slow weight behind her ribs that would not settle. He reached over and lifted the edge of the cloak back onto her shoulder where it had slipped, an absent-minded, almost tender motion, the kind a person makes without thinking about a thing they have already decided is theirs to look after. Then he answered the lieutenant without looking away from Wren. "I will tell you," he said, "when I have finished counting." They took Halden in the courtyard. Wren watched it from the doorway, half hidden in the fur of the cloak. She had spent years of her life arranging herself around this man, mapping his footsteps, timing her small movements to the gaps between his patrols. He had broken her wrist once. He had pressed something hot against the backs of her legs once. He had tied her to a post once and walked away. In her mind, he had grown into something the size of a storm. 2 iron-clad riders took him by the arms, and he did not fight them. And in the gray daylight, with his hands bound in front of him and his head bowed, he looked ordinary, smaller than she remembered. His hair was thinning at the temples. His shoulders were not the shoulders of a storm. They were the shoulders of a tired man who had run out of road. He lifted his head as they led him past, and his eyes found her face in the fold of the cloak. He did not sneer. He did not threaten. His eyes were red, rimmed, and wet, and he looked at her for one long moment, and then he looked away first. Halden looked away from her first. Something in Wren's chest, which had been clenched for 19 years, loosened by the smallest fraction. Not forgiveness, not anything so large or finished as that. Just a tiny, surprised shifting, like a stone settling in a wall. Behind her, Roan was watching her watch him. He had seen the man look away. He had seen the small thing move in her face, and the wolf in him, which had wanted very badly to follow Halden out into the snow and finish him there, went quiet and watchful instead, because it was learning something about the woman it had crossed the whole north to find. She did not want a storm. She had survived enough storms. What she wanted, he was beginning to understand, was something far more frightening to a man like him. She wanted to be the one who decided. They put her in the warmest room in the house, a study high up under the eaves, with a stone hearth large enough to stand in, and a woven rug that felt almost alive under her bare feet. She had never been on this floor. Omegas were not permitted above the ground. The windows looked out over the birches and the white valley, over the very ground where she had laid down her last beautiful lie in the dark. The healer came, a quiet woman with careful hands. She cleaned and wrapped the cracked knuckles and the bleeding feet. She found the old burns on the backs of Wren's legs and the pale rings on her wrists, and she did not ask a single question about any of it. When she reached Wren's mouth and Wren opened it to show her the smooth, dark hollow, the healer paused for the length of 2 breaths. Then she closed her bag and rested one hand very lightly on Wren's shoulder, and left. Wren sat alone in the warm room in the borrowed cloak. She pressed the fur against her face and breathed in cedar and iron and the faint animal warmth of him. And she looked out at the snow, and she did not know yet how to hold the size of what was happening to her. She only knew one new thing. Somewhere below her, in a house that had spent her whole life pretending she was not in it, a door had finally been left unlocked. And on the other side of it, for the first time, someone was waiting to be let in. The two trackers came back on the fourth day with snow in their collars and a map rolled under one arm. Their names were Reed and Tate, and they moved through the world the way smoke moves, quiet and low and easy to miss. They had followed prey across rivers and ridgelines and old burned forests. They did not impress easily. Wren could tell that just by the way they stood, so she noticed when they would not quite look at her. They spread the map across the wide desk in the study, and Roan leaned over it, and Wren sat in the corner in the wolf fur cloak she had not taken off once since he gave it to her. The fire crackled. The valley lay white and silent in the window. Reed put one finger on the map. 7, he said. Roan looked up. 7 false trails, Tate said. Going back 3 winters at least, maybe more. The old ones are hard to read now. The snow has worked them over. Reed traced a line across the parchment. Slow. All of them defensive, he said. Every single one. Not a hunting trail among them. They are built to take an enemy who is already moving toward this valley and turn him. Send him somewhere that does the killing for you. A ravine here. A bog here. A long stretch of thin ice over the river. Here. He looked up, and for the first time, he looked straight at Wren. The craftsmanship, he said, and then he stopped because the word was not big enough, and he knew it. Tate finished it for him. Whoever laid these down understands how a wolf carries its weight better than any tracker living, he said. Not the shape of a wolf, the shape of one wolf. A particular animal on a particular night. There is a trail out there that copies the gait of this pack's own beta so closely that I walked it twice before something in me said no. The stride was a hair too even. A real wolf favors. This one did not. It was made. The room was very quiet. Roan turned and looked at Wren, and there was a question in his face, and she understood it. And she did not look away from him. She reached for the quill that lay on the desk. She dipped it, and on a clean sheet of parchment, she wrote in the small, precise hand she had taught herself from books in the dark under the stairs. I learned by watching. Every wolf leaves a different mark. I watched for 17 years. Roan read it. He read it again. You built all 7, he said. She nodded. By yourself. She nodded again. In the dark, he said, slowly. In the snow. Barefoot. She looked down at the bandages on her feet, and then back up at him, and she nodded once more. Roan turned to the trackers, and his voice came out level and quiet, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. How many lives? He said. If the enemy scouts had reached what they were walking toward those 7 times, how many of this pack would be dead? Tate did the arithmetic in his head. He was a man who did not guess. Conservatively, he said, 60, 80. If you count the time the thin ice turned a raiding party back from the nursery. There were pups in that nursery. Something happened to Roan's eyes. They had been amber, the brown gold of pine resin held up to a flame. Now they went pure gold, bright and burning. And the air in the room changed pressure so that Wren's ears popped, and even Reed, who feared very little, took the smallest step back. 80 lives, Roan said. He was not looking at the trackers. He was looking at Wren, and his voice had dropped to almost nothing. 80 lives, he said again. And they fed you broth. Wren looked at the floor. She had never thought of it as a number. She had only ever thought of it as a thing she did, the way other people breathed without counting their breaths. She had saved them because they were there to be saved, and because some stubborn animal part of her refused to let the only world she knew be torn apart, even by people who would not have wept for her. She had never once expected thanks. She did not know what to do with the way this man kept looking at her as though she were the single most valuable thing in the northern world. That night, sleep would not come. The bed in the study was soft past the point of comfort, so soft that her body, trained for years on bare stone, simply refused to trust it. She lay awake until the fire was embers, then rose and wrapped herself in the cloak and went barefoot down the dark corridor, meaning only to find water. She did not find water. She found the floor above the great hall, where the boards were old and warped and let sound rise up through the cracks like heat. And she heard her own name. She knelt without deciding to. She pressed her ear to the cold wood. Below in the hall, Lieutenant Dawes was speaking to someone, low and even, and a ledger scratched under her pen. One by one, all that long day, she had been calling the members of Greywater in to answer for themselves. Wren had heard the murmur of it through the floor for hours. Who struck the mute Omega? Who turned her away from the table? Who watched and did nothing and called it none of their concern? Now it was Della's turn. Wren knew her voice at once. I gave her broth, Della was saying, and her voice was flat in the way a voice goes flat when it is holding something heavy. Every day. Broth with lentils when there were lentils to spare. And the others, Dawes said. The full pack. What did they receive? A pause. Stew, Della said. Bread. Meat, when there was meat. Then why, Dawes said, was her bowl different? The silence stretched long enough that Wren stopped breathing. And then Della said a thing that Wren had never once, in all those counted years, imagined. Because if I gave her more, Della said, he would take it from her. And beat her for having it. Halden. He watched the table like a hawk. The broth was the one thing I could put in front of her that he would not bother to notice. 3 lentils. 4 when he was out on patrol, and I dared. I counted them in every time. It was all I could give her without getting her hurt for it. The pen stopped scratching. Wren sat back from the floorboards in the dark. For 19 years she had counted those lentils as the exact measure of her own worth. 3 small things at the bottom of a gray bowl. 3. That was what she was. That was what they thought she was. It had never once crossed her mind that someone else was counting them too, for a different reason entirely, that the small mean bowl had not been an insult. It had been the only shape love could take in that house without being beaten out of someone's hands. She pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth, hard over the place where words had been taken from her. And she stayed there on the cold floor in the dark for a long time, and she did not make a sound because she had taught herself long ago how to weep without one. Roan found her there. He came up the stairs without a candle because his eyes did not need one, and he stopped at the top when he saw the small shape of her huddled against the floorboards, with the great cloak pooled around her like a spill of dark water. He did not speak. He lowered himself down to sit a careful distance away, his back against the wall, his long legs folded, his hands loose and open and visible on his knees, the way a man keeps his hands when he wants another creature to know they are empty. He did not reach for her. He had learned that already. In one single day he had learned it. You did not reach for this one. You waited, and you let her come. And the waiting was its own kind of speech. After a while, Wren picked up the small stub of charcoal she kept tucked in the cloak now, because she had begun to understand that in this place, unlike every other place, what she wrote would be read. On the pale wood of the floor between them, she wrote. Della counted them too. Roan read it in the dark. She protected me. I thought it was cruelty. It was the only thing she could carry without it being taken. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very low, cruelty is loud. It wants to be seen. The quiet things are almost always the other kind. He looked at her across the small dark space between them. You have been surrounded your whole life, he said, by quiet things you taught yourself to read as cruelty, because cruelty was what you were given most. So you learned its handwriting, and you started reading everything in it. Wren went very still. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said about her, and he had said it after knowing her for the length of a few days, and she did not understand how a man so large and so scarred and so used to taking the world by the throat had learned to be this gentle, this exact, this careful, with the soft places no one else had ever bothered to find. She wrote one more thing on the floor. How do you know what I am thinking when I never make a sound? Roan looked at the words for a long moment. Then he reached out, slowly, and turned his own hand palm up on the floorboards between them, an open invitation, asking nothing. I am learning to read you, he said, the way you read the snow. She looked at his open hand, and after a while, she laid her fingers across his palm, and with the tip of one finger, she traced a single letter against his skin. Slow, the way she had taught herself to talk to the empty air when there was no paper and no one watching. He felt the letter form. His breath caught. She traced another and another, spelling something out against the warmth of his hand in the dark. Thankyu. Roan closed his fingers around hers, gently, holding the words inside his fist as if they were something that might blow away. And the wolf inside him, the savage thing he had caged for 9 years, the animal he did not trust, lay down in the dark of him and went quiet and put its head on its paws and simply listened. In the morning, she heard the other confession. She had not gone looking for it. She had been on her way to the kitchen in the gray hour before the house woke, and the path took her past a small room off the great hall with an iron-banded door, and the guard had stepped away, and the viewing slot stood open. Halden sat on the floor inside, his back to the wall, his wrists bound in front of him. He lifted his head before she could pass. I know you are there, he said. His voice was rough as gravel. I can smell you. You smell different now. You smell like him. Wren said nothing. She could not say anything. She stood at the slot, half turned away, and she did not leave. Vesper told us you were cursed, he said, that your bloodline had been marked, that keeping you fed and housed at all was charity, and that if we treated you like one of us, the curse would spread to the rest. He pressed his bound hands against his face for a moment, then let them fall. The lieutenant asked me when I first understood what I had done, he said. I told her a lie. I told her I understood it when the king walked through that door. He looked at her through the slot. The truth is, I understood the first time I struck you. Wren's hands curled slowly into the fur of the cloak, You were 11, Halden said. You had taken an apple from the barrel. You were sitting on the kitchen floor, eating it like it was the finest thing in the world. And you looked up at me when I came in. His voice cracked. And you were not afraid, he said. You should have been. You were resigned. So young. And already resigned. As if you already knew exactly how the world was going to go for you, and you had simply made your peace with it, and you were going to enjoy your apple anyway in the time you had before it started. He shook his head, slow. And I struck you anyway, he said, because if I let myself feel what that look did to me, I would have to admit that what we were doing was wrong. And I had already been part of it for years by then, and years of cruelty are a weight that will not let a coward turn around. He lowered his eyes. The king will end me for this, he said. I have made my peace with that, the same way you made yours with the apple. But I needed you to know one thing. He looked up one last time. That apple, he said, you eating it on the floor like a feast. I have not stopped seeing it, not in all the winters since. Wren stood at the door for a long time. Then she turned and walked back through the cold house, and she did not go to the kitchen after all. She went up to the study, and she sat by the dead fire, and she pressed the cloak to her face, and breathed cedar and iron until her heart stopped trying to climb out of her chest. She did not feel triumph. She had expected, somewhere far down, that one day she might. That if this man ever knelt and named what he had done, she would feel the bright, clean rush of being right. What she felt instead was stranger and heavier and more honest. She felt the apple. She felt the small girl on the floor, eating in the little space between one cruelty and the next, choosing, even then, to taste the sweetness while she could. That girl had not been broken. That was the thing no one had ever seen. She had been resigned, yes. But underneath the resignation, she had been so stubbornly, ferociously alive that a grown man had carried the memory of her like a stone in his shoe for years. Wren had spent her whole life believing she was nothing. And one by one, in this strange unraveling week, the people of that house were telling her, each in their broken way, that they had always known otherwise, that her smallness had been their shame, not her truth. It was almost too much to hold. But the world, as it always does, did not pause to let her hold it. Because that same morning, the crows came. Roan found her at the study window, very still, watching the northern tree line. He had come to bring her bread and to sit with her in the easy silence they had started to build. But she did not turn when he entered. She lifted one hand instead, slow, and pointed out the glass. He followed her finger. Above the far birches, a loose black scatter of crows was wheeling and lifting and refusing to settle, turning over the same stretch of forest again and again, the way birds do when something is moving beneath them that should not be there. Roan went very still beside her. "What is it?" he said. Wren took up the charcoal. "The Blackthorn lost 3 scouts in my ravine," she wrote. "Their alpha is named Dax. He holds the high passes. He will not swallow that loss in silence." Roan read it. "How long?" he said. Wren looked back at the crows, reading the slow, furious shape of their circling the way another person would read a written page. "Soon," she wrote. And then she added, below it, in letters that pressed hard into the parchment, "He is bringing the whole clan this time." The bread sat forgotten on the desk. Outside, the crows would not land, and the wind began to turn, carrying down off the high passes the first faint thread of a scent that even Wren, with no wolf to call her own, somehow felt at the back of her throat. Cold iron. Many bodies. Coming closer. Beside her, Roan looked down at the woman who had saved this ungrateful house 80 lives over, with her bare hands in the dark, and asked for nothing. And he understood that the world was about to ask her for everything one more time. And this time, he swore silently to the quiet thing inside him. This time, she would not stand alone. The closer the threat came, the louder the bond grew. Wren had no word for it because no one had ever taught her the word, but she could feel it the way she felt a coming storm in the soles of her feet. A pull, a low and constant pull, somewhere behind her breastbone, that turned always toward wherever Roan happened to be in the house. When he was near, the pull settled and warmed and almost purred. When he left a room, it ached. It frightened her, how quickly her body had learned the shape of him. She had spent her whole life needing no one, because needing was a door that only ever let the cold in. And now there was this animal certainty that had moved into her without asking, that knew his step in the corridor before her ears did, that lifted its head at the scent of cedar drifting under a door. She did not trust it. She had been taught over and over that the things she wanted were the things that would be taken first. His scent had changed too. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, from a small, careful distance. The cedar had gone deeper. The hot iron underneath it had sharpened. When he stood close now, there was a third thing woven through it, low and warm and unmistakable, even to a woman who had never in her life been wanted. A heat that made the air between them feel thick, that made her own skin wake up along her arms and the back of her neck, that made the sleeping weight in her chest stretch toward him and want. And every single time he pulled back, she felt that too. She would lean the smallest fraction toward him, and his whole body would go taut as a drawn bow. And then he would step away, putting careful air between them, his jaw tight, his hands closing into fists at his sides. The first few times, she did not understand it. By the third day of it, she understood it the only way her history had ever taught her to understand anything. He did not truly want her. Of course he did not. She was a wolfless thing with a hollow where her voice should be and scars and rings around her wrists. The bond had made a mistake. He was honorable, and he was kind, and he was holding to a duty his nature had handed him. But when it came to the last small distance, the distance that meant choosing, he stepped away every time. She had been right all along. Even here, even now, even with the one creature in all the world who could read her. She was not enough to be chosen, only enough to be protected. It is a strange and terrible thing how fast an old wound learns a new language. What Wren could not see was what the pulling back was costing him. Roan stood at the window of his own borrowed room each night with his forehead against the cold glass, and his hands flat on the stone sill. And he breathed, and he counted, and he held the wolf down with everything he had. The animal wanted her with a force that had no banks and no bottom. It did not want her gently. That was the whole horror of it. It wanted to close the last distance and put its mark in her skin, and bind her to him so completely that nothing in any world could ever come for her again. And it wanted to do this now, tonight, with the threat coming down off the high passes and the bond screaming in both of them. And he knew exactly what that wanting could do. He had been 19. He had felt the bond rise once before, years ago, a flood with no shore. And he had been young and certain and unafraid, and he had let it take him. And the one it rose for had not survived what his wolf became in the grip of it. The animal had loved her the way fire loves a dry field, all at once and without mercy. And when the fire burned out, there had been nothing left but the knowing. He had told the world a story after that his wolf was too savage, that no female could survive the bond with him. He had let them believe it was a curse of strength. The truth was smaller and worse. The truth was that he did not trust himself near the thing he wanted most. So now he stood at the window each night with the scent of her 3 doors away, the cedar in him reaching for the cold, clean cedar of her. And he held the wolf by the throat and would not let it move. He would die before he let it do to her what it had done before. What he did not understand, what neither of them understood, was that a woman who has been taught she is nothing reads restraint as rejection. And so, without a word, without a sound, in a house full of people learning at last to listen, the two of them were quietly breaking each other's hearts in opposite directions. It came to a head on the 4th night. She had not meant for it to. She had risen for water again, and he had been in the corridor, unable to sleep himself, and they had nearly walked into one another in the dark. The bond flared so hard between them that Wren gasped without sound. For one moment, neither of them moved. His scent rolled over her, cedar and iron and that low-banked heat, and her whole body turned toward him like a plant turning toward a window, and she was so tired, suddenly so tired of holding herself apart, that she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She stepped into him. She laid her palms flat against his chest, over the hard drum of his heart, and she tilted her face up, and she let him see everything she had no words for. And Roan made a sound like a man struck, and he caught her wrists, and he set her back from him, gently, so gently, but he set her back. And in the thin gray light from the window she saw his face, and she read it the way she read everything, fast and certain and merciless, and she got it wrong in the oldest way she knew. She read the strain in his jaw as distaste. She read the iron control as reluctance. She read the careful distance he kept as the simple plain truth that even now, even here, she was a thing to be endured and not a thing to be wanted. She pulled her wrists free. She stepped back, and the look that crossed her face then was worse than any flinch, worse than any tears, because it was not pain. It was recognition. The terrible, quiet recognition of a person confirming a thing she has always believed about herself. "Oh," said that look. "Of course. I forgot for a moment. I am sorry. I will not forget again." She turned and went back to the study and shut the door without a sound. And Roan stood alone in the dark corridor with her scent still on his hands and understood, far too late, exactly what she had read in him. He did not knock for a long time. He stood outside the study door with his hand raised and his heart going like a war drum, and the wolf in him whined low, frantic, scratching at the cage, because the bond had felt her pull away, and it did not understand, and it was in agony. When he finally opened the door, she was sitting by the cold hearth, very straight, the cloak around her shoulders, her face composed into the smooth blank mask he recognized now as the one she had worn her whole life, the mask that said nothing can reach me here. He had spent days teaching himself to take that mask apart. He crossed the room and lowered himself to the rug in front of her, so that for once she was the one looking down. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and it is going to be hard for me to say, because it is the truest thing about me, and I have never said it to a living soul." She did not move. "When the bond first rose in me," he said, "I was young. There was someone. I let it take me. I did not hold it back, because I did not know yet that it needed holding." His hands were open on his knees, and they were not quite steady. "She did not survive it," he said. "My wolf does not love the way other wolves love. It loves the way a fire loves dry grass, all at once, without mercy. When the bond takes him fully, he does not know how to stop, and there was nothing left of her, and I have carried that every day since." Wren had gone very still. "So I built a story," he said, "that I was too savage to mate, that no female could survive me, and I let it keep everyone at a distance, because the real reason was smaller and uglier, and I could not say it." He looked up at her. "The real reason," he said, "is that I do not trust myself with the thing I want most, and I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want you. Which means you are the one person in this world I am most afraid of harming." His voice dropped. "Every time I step back from you," he said, "it is not because I do not want you. It is because I want you so much that the wolf in me forgets you are not made of stone. And I will tear out my own heart before I let him do to you what he did before." The fire ticked in the grate. "I have been breaking your heart," he said, "trying not to break your body. And I did not see, until tonight, that you were reading my fear as the one thing it has never been. I am sorry. You have spent your whole life being told you are not wanted. And I, of all the creatures alive, have been standing in front of you every day, acting it out. I am so sorry." Wren sat in the firelight, and something enormous was happening inside her, and it had no sound, because nothing about her ever did. She had spent 4 days dying quietly of an old certainty, and he had just reached into her chest and pulled the certainty out by the root and shown her it had never been true. He was not stepping back because she was nothing. He was stepping back because she was everything, and he did not trust his own hands around something that mattered this much. It was the difference between being unwanted and being treasured by someone too frightened of his own strength to hold what he loved. And those are not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. She had simply never, in her whole life, been given the second one to compare against the first. Slowly, she reached for the charcoal. Her hand was shaking. She steadied it the way she steadied everything, by sheer will, and on the pale parchment she wrote. And then she turned it so he could read it in the firelight. "You think I am made of glass." Roan read it. "I am not made of glass," she wrote beneath it. "I set my own wrist with a stick when I was a child. I walked home barefoot through the snow with my feet bleeding and built you a masterwork in the dark. I have been surviving things that would have ended stronger wolves since before you were a king. She wrote faster now, the charcoal pressing hard. I do not need you to protect me from yourself. I need you to trust me to be a person, to choose, to want, to say yes or no with my own mouth, except I do not have the mouth, so with my own hand. You keep deciding for me what I can survive. Everyone has always decided for me what I can survive. She underlined the next line twice. Let me decide. Roan looked at the words for a long, long time, and then his face did the thing she had seen it do once before. That first day in the kitchen, it cracked, like ice on a river in spring, a sudden structural failure across the whole surface. But this time, what came up from underneath was not hunger, and it was not grief. It was awe. You are the most stubbornly alive thing I have ever met, he said quietly. They cut your voice out and starved you in a closet, and you saved them 80 lives over and asked for nothing. And now you are sitting here telling the Alpha King of the North that he does not get to decide what you can survive. He shook his head, slow. She lifted her chin, and then she reached for the charcoal one more time, and she wrote one more line. And there was something in the set of her shoulders that was almost mischievous, a thing he had never seen on her, a thing that had been buried so deep and for so long that it came up blinking into the light. Yes, she wrote. He went still. Yes, she had written. And then, underneath it, in her small, precise, stubborn hand, I will come with you. I will be your Luna. I will let you keep me. And then, lower still, as if it were the most important condition of all, but I want my own desk. Roan stared at the words. I want my own desk, not jewels, not a throne, not safety, not vengeance, not even love spelled out in plain letters. A desk, a flat, clean surface that was hers, where she could draw her maps and design her traps and put down on paper the extraordinary mind that this whole ungrateful world had spent her whole life refusing to read. A place to do her work. A place to be a person. And Roan Vance, the Alpha King of the North, the man whose wolf had killed and whose face was a map of old violence, the creature whose laughter no one in 9 years had ever heard, laughed. It came out of him sudden and rough and far too loud, startling them both. A sound with no polish on it at all. The laugh of a man caught completely off his guard by joy. It filled the small, warm room. It cracked open the very last wall she had built around herself, the deepest one, the one even she had forgotten was there. And Wren sat in the firelight with charcoal on her fingers and tears standing in her eyes, and felt the wall come down, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, the strange light feeling of being fully and completely seen, and wanted, and chosen, with nothing held back and nothing left to prove. Done, he said, when he could speak again. His eyes were wet and bright and gold at the edges. You will have your desk. You will have 100 desks. You will have a whole wing of the stronghold if you want it, and trackers who answer to you, and maps no one has dared to draw in 200 years. He leaned in, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not pull away. He rested his forehead against hers, gently, the way she had once tilted her cheek into his hand, and the bond between them did not roar this time. It settled. It hummed. It found, at last, the one frequency they had both been listening for their whole lives, and never heard until they found each other. His hand came up and cupped the back of her head, careful as a man holding something that had survived a great deal and would survive a great deal more. Not because he thought she was glass, because he finally understood that she was not. They stayed like that for a long time, forehead to forehead in the firelight, breathing each other in, cedar and iron and snow. Two creatures the world had tried to break in opposite ways, learning the slow and careful shape of being chosen. And somewhere out beyond the dark birches, the wind kept turning. The threat kept coming. But for this one long quiet hour, in a room with a fire, and a locked door, and a promise of a desk, neither of them stood alone anymore. The judgment could not wait much longer. Everyone in the house knew it. An alpha king had ridden into a pack and found his mate kept like a stain on the floor, and the law was old and plain about what came next. The ones who had harmed a royal mate had harmed the crown. Their lives were forfeit. It was not a question of whether. It was only a question of how, and how soon. Roan meant to kill them. He did not say it out loud, but Ren did not need him to say it. She read it in him the way she read everything, in the set of his shoulders when Halden's name was spoken, in the gold that came up in his eyes when he passed the locked room, in the careful, terrible patience of a man holding a sentence the way a man holds a stone he is about to throw. He was waiting only because of her. He had told her so, simply, the night before, his hand resting warm against the back of her neck. "I will not move on them," he had said, "until you tell me you are ready to watch it done. They are yours to answer for now, not the law's, yours." She had lain awake most of the night with that. It would have been easy. That was the thing no one warns you about with vengeance. It would have been so easy to nod and let the gold rise in his eyes, and let the men who had broken her wrist and burned her legs and tied her to a post simply stop existing. Part of her wanted it. She would not lie to herself about that. There was a small, hard place in her, grown in the dark under the stairs, that wanted to watch Halden's eyes go out like a snuffed candle. But she kept seeing the apple. She kept seeing the 11-year-old on the kitchen floor, eating in the small space between cruelties, so stubbornly alive that a grown man had carried the memory like a stone for years. And she kept thinking about what it would mean to take the thing that had been done to her and do a smaller version of it back. In the gray morning, she went to find Rowan, and she brought the charcoal. He was in the study, looking out at the tree line, and he turned when she came in, and he read her face and went still. "You have decided," he said. She nodded. She sat, and she wrote, and she turned the parchment to him. "Do not kill Halden." Roan looked at the words for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, level, the voice of a man keeping a great pressure under control. "He broke your wrist," he said. "He burned you. He tied you to a post and walked away. Tell me why I should not open the door right now and end it." Ren wrote, "Because he is not the only one who hurt me." She let him read it, then went on. Della watched. The Omega girls watched. Orin watched, and Orin was the alpha. And an alpha who lets a child be mutilated in his own house is guilty of more than the one who swings the hand. If you kill everyone who watched and did nothing, you will have to kill almost the entire pack. The ones who turned their faces away are more numerous than the ones who struck. Roan read it twice. That, he said quietly, was an option I had already considered. She looked at him steadily, and she wrote one line, and it was the line that made him sit down across from her. I know, and that is exactly why it should not be you who decides. The room was very quiet. What would you have me do? He said at last. And this was where Wren had spent the long night, not on whether to spare them, on what mercy actually was, because she had learned in her short, hard life that mercy is not the same as forgetting, and it is not the same as pretending, and it is most certainly not the same as letting a thing simply go. She picked up the charcoal and she wrote for a long time, and Roan waited, patient as stone, the way he had learned to wait for her. When she turned the page to him, this is what it said: "Make Halden build the ravine." He read it, and his brow drew together, not understanding yet. She wrote more. "The trap that took his scouts, the one I built with my bare hands in the dark, it needs a proper system now. Reinforced sides, drainage so it does not flood when the snow melts, a warning line so our own wolves never fall into it the way I once did. He knows construction. He has hands and a back and years left in him." She paused, then pressed the charcoal down hard. "Make him build it, and make him build it, knowing that every part of it was designed by the mute girl he tied to a post. Make him spend the rest of his useful life maintaining the work of the creature he spent years trying to convince himself was nothing." Roan read it slowly. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You want him to spend his life," he said, "building your traps, maintaining your designs, taking his orders, in the end, from you." She nodded. "That," he said, "is crueler than killing him." Wren looked at him, and then she picked up the charcoal one last time, and she wrote 3 words, and she did not look away from his face while he read them. "I know." Good. Something moved behind Roan's eyes. It was not the cold gold of the killing rage. It was the cracking thing again, the ice on the river, and underneath it this time was an expression she was only beginning to learn to recognize on him. Pride. Raw, undisguised, slightly stunned pride. The look of a man discovering that the quiet creature he had claimed was not quiet at all, but operating on a frequency he was only now learning to hear. "You understand," he said softly, "that most people, given the chance to end the one who hurt them, take it. They do not think about drainage." Wren almost smiled. The corner of her mouth moved just slightly. She wrote, "Killing him lets him stop. Lets him be done. Lets the story end. I do not want his story to end. I want him to live a long life inside the truth he spent years running from. Every day, every stone he sets. That is not mercy because I am soft. It is justice because I am exact." Roan let out a long breath. "And the old Alpha," he said. "Orin. He did not strike you, but he let it all happen under his roof." Wren had thought about this too. "Strip him," she wrote. "Take his pack, his rank, his name as Alpha. Let him live the rest of his years as nothing in the house where he made me nothing. Let him learn the shape of the thing he handed me, one ordinary day at a time. You said it yourself once. The quiet punishments are almost always the heavier kind." Roan read it, and then he sat back, and he looked at her for a long moment with something close to wonder. "You are going to be a terrifying queen," he said. It was the second time he had said it. This time, she let the small smile come. The trackers came in before midday, and the smiles ended. Reed and Tate came up the stairs together, snow on their shoulders, and they did not bother with the formal words. Tate spread a fresh sheet on the desk, and Reed put his finger on the northern passes, and the very first thing he said dropped the temperature in the room. "They are moving," he said. Roan crossed to the desk in 2 strides. "The whole clan," Tate said. "Not a raiding party this time. Dax has called up everyone who can walk and bite. They are coming down through the high country, and they are coming for the house. They want the pack that humiliated them wiped off the valley floor." "How long?" Roan said. Reed and Tate looked at each other. 2 days, Reed said. "Maybe less, if the weather holds for them." Roan's hands flattened on the map. "Numbers," he said. 200, Tate said. "At the least. We are 40 riders and a broken pack that does not know how to fight together." The room went silent except for the fire, and in the corner, in the wolf fur cloak, Wren felt something cold open up in her chest that had nothing to do with the bond, because here it was again. The old question, the one she had carried her whole life like a stone in the mouth she no longer had. What was she, really, when the moment came? A mute omega with no wolf. A girl who had never once shifted in 23 winters. A creature who could draw a trap in the snow with her bare feet, yes, but who had never stood on a battlefield, never raised a hand against a living enemy, never been anything in a fight but the thing that hid in the cellar and waited to see who came back. What right did she have to stand in a war council? What good was a voice no one could hear, on a field full of teeth? She felt the smallness rise up in her, the old familiar smallness, and it whispered the thing it had always whispered. "Sit down, stay quiet, stay out of the way. Let the real wolves handle the real things. You are good only for the dark and the snow and the work no one sees." Roan was looking at the map, talking low with the trackers about lines and flanks, and ground they did not know. Ground they did not know. Wren went very still. Ground they did not know. She rose from the corner, she crossed to the desk on her bandaged feet, and she put herself in among the 3 tall warriors, and she pulled the map toward her, and all 3 of them stopped talking and looked at her. She studied it, and the cold smallness in her chest met something else, something harder and older and far more sure of itself. Because there was one thing in this whole valley that she knew better than any wolf alive, better than Dax, better than Roan, better than the trackers who had followed prey across the world. She knew the ground, every frozen stream, every patch of thin ice, every drift that lay deeper than it looked, every narrow gully where 100 charging wolves would be squeezed down to single file and turned, for one fatal breath, from an army into a line of targets. She had spent 17 years reading this valley in the dark. She picked up the charcoal, and she began to write on the edge of the map, fast and small and certain, and the 3 warriors leaned in to read, and Roan watched the words appear and felt the wolf in him rise up in something that was almost reverence. "You do not have the numbers," she wrote, "so you will not fight their fight. You will fight mine." She drew a line through the birches. "Send the heaviest riders here, through the deep drift. Their wolves will flounder in it. Your war horses are wide-footed and heavy and will pack it down and ride on top." She drew another line along a ridge. "Put the archers here, above the frozen creek. The wind comes south off the passes every morning at this hour. It will carry your scent away from them and theirs to you. You will know where they are before they know you are there. She drew a third mark, an X, at the mouth of a narrow gully. And this is where you break them. They will come fast and confident and too many. And this throat of rock will squeeze them to single file. And a charge becomes a slaughter when it can only arrive one wolf at a time. She set down the charcoal. The three warriors stared at the map. Then Tate, who did not impress easily, who had followed prey across half the world, looked up at her with an expression she had never been given before in her entire life. It was the look one expert gives another. This, he said quietly, is better than anything in our own war doctrine. Roan looked at Wren across the desk, and the smallness in her chest, the old whispering smallness, went quiet at last, because she understood, standing there in the borrowed cloak with charcoal on her fingers, that she had asked the wrong question her whole life. She had been asking whether a mute Omega with no wolf had any right to stand among warriors. The right question was simpler. What can you do that no one else here can? And the answer was spread out on the desk in front of all of them, drawn in her own hand. She could see the ground. She could win this before the first claw was ever drawn. I am not a fighter, she wrote, one last line, almost to herself. Roan read it. Then he reached across the map and laid his scarred hand over her small one, gently, and he answered her in a voice the whole room heard. No, he said, you are something the world forgot it ever had. You are a map, and a map wins wars that swords only finish. Outside, the wind turned colder, and somewhere up in the high passes, 200 wolves came down through the snow toward a valley they thought they understood. They did not understand it. There was a woman in that valley who had read every inch of it in the dark, with bleeding feet, for 17 years. And for the first time in her life, she was going to use what she knew in the open, where everyone could see. The morning of the battle came up gray and clear and bitterly cold, exactly as she had said it would. Wren stood at the study window before dawn and watched the crows lift off the northern birches all at once, a black scatter against the paling sky, and she knew. They were close. The wind was already turning, coming down off the high passes the way it always did at this hour, and on it she could taste the thing she had warned them of, cold iron, many bodies. Coming fast. She wrote one word on a scrap of parchment. Now. She did not walk down to the courtyard. She ran, barefoot, the cloak streaming behind her, down through a house that was finally fully awake, past faces that no longer looked through her but turned to follow her as she passed, until she burst out into the cold and found Lieutenant Dawes already mounted and waiting. Dawes took the scrap from her hand, read the single word, looked once at Wren's face, and drew her sword. The horn went up. Within 4 breaths, the riders were moving, sliding into the formation Wren had drawn on the map 2 nights before, and Roan came down the steps, half-armored, the chest plate strapped, but the arm guard still swinging loose, and his eyes were already gold. How many? He said to Dawes. The lieutenant pointed at Wren. She says now. And she has not been wrong yet. She is not wrong, Roan said, lifting his head, breathing the turning wind. 200. Coming through the birch stand. He looked down at Wren. How did you know before I did? Before any of us. She pointed at the empty sky where the crows had been. The birds, she meant. The birds always know first. Roan looked at her for one long moment. Then he reached down, caught her under the arms, and lifted her onto the saddle in front of him as if she weighed nothing at all, which, after a lifetime of 3 lentils, she very nearly did. "You will stay behind the line," he said, low against her ear. "You will not engage. You point. I read your hands. Whatever you see up there that the rest of us are too slow and too earthbound to see. You give it to me, and I turn it into orders, and my wolves do the rest." She nodded. And then, because she could not help it, because the cold smallness still lived in some corner of her, she traced a question against the back of his gloved hand with one finger. Why me? Why not just fight? He understood it. He had learned her hands. Because swords win the part of a battle you can see, he said, and you win the part no one else can. Then he set his heels to the horse, and they rode out to meet the war she had already half won in the dark. It came down through the birches exactly as she had known it would. 200 wolves of the Blackthorn clan, dark and fast and furious, pouring down the slope in a wave meant to break the valley open. Wren felt the ground shake through the horse beneath her. She felt the enemy's confidence rolling ahead of them like heat off a fire. They had numbers. They had rage. They had every reason in the world to believe this would be over by midday. They did not have the ground. She did. She watched them come, and her whole life of reading tracks collapsed into this single bright instant, and she began to see the battle the way she had always seen the snow, not as chaos, as a language, as lines and weights and pressures, as places where a thing could be turned, as the one narrow throat of rock where 200 became one. She lifted her hands, no voice in her throat, and never in her whole life had she needed one less. She sent her left hand sweeping toward the deep drift below the birches, palm flat, pushing, and Roan read it and roared the order. And the heaviest riders wheeled their wide-footed war horses into the drift, and the charging wolves who followed them in floundered, chest deep, slowed to a crawl, while the great horses packed the snow and rode along the top of it like a road. She drew her right hand up along the ridge, fingers spread, and Roan read it. And the archers climbed to the high ground above the frozen creek, where the south wind carried the enemy scent straight to them and carried their own scent away, so that they loosed from a place the Blackthorn never thought to look. And then she made a fist. She made a fist and drove it forward toward the narrow gully, the throat of rock, the X she had marked on the map. And Roan understood. And his voice came out of him like thunder rolling down a valley, and the whole iron line bent and gave ground in exactly the right way, falling back, drawing the enemy on, baiting the great confident wave of them toward the one place where confidence would kill them. The Blackthorn took the bait. Of course they did. They were winning, or they thought they were. And a winning army does not stop to ask why the ground ahead is narrowing. They poured into the gully 200 strong, and came out the far end one at a time, and the Iron Fang line, waiting, closed on them like a door. It was not a battle after that. It was arithmetic. Wren had done the arithmetic 2 nights before by firelight, and now it played itself out on the white ground below her, and she sat the horse with her hands still moving, reading, adjusting, sending a flank here and pulling one back there. And Roan turned every silent motion of her fingers into a roar his wolves obeyed without a heartbeat of doubt. She found the enemy Alpha by his tracks. That was the thing no one else could have done. In all that churned and bloody snow, with 200 wolves tearing the field to ruin, Wren found one particular set of prints, a distinctive spacing she had memorized long ago from studying his fallen scouts, and she knew it was Dax, and she lifted one hand and pointed him out across the whole length of the field. "There," her hand said. "That one. The heart of them." "I see him," Roan said, and then he set her down from the saddle, gently, behind the forward line, and he looked at her once with his burning gold eyes, and he shifted. The Alpha King's wolf was not black. Every story Wren had ever read had said the Alpha King's wolf was black. It was not. It was the dark, wet gray of slate after rain, and it was the largest wolf she had ever seen, the size of the war horse she had been riding, with shoulders like a bull and a head that seemed too heavy for any spine to carry. It hit the field like a landslide, and the blackthorn wolves nearest it scattered, and it cut a straight burning line through the chaos toward the one set of prints she had pointed out. It hit Dax at full speed. The sound was like two great trees falling against one another. Wren watched from behind the line, gripping the mane of a horse she no longer sat, and the sleeping weight that had woken the day Roan walked through the kitchen door began to press. It pressed and pressed against the inside of her ribs, and the high, thin sound she had buried years ago, the one that was not a howl and not a scream, but something lost and wavering between the two, began to climb up her throat without her permission. Not now, she thought. Not here. Not in the middle of this. But her body had stopped listening to her. It had been listening to everyone else her whole life, to the people who decided what she could survive, to the ones who told her she was nothing, to the small, mean voice that said, "Sit down and stay quiet and stay out of the way." It was done listening. The sound came out of her. It tore loose from the hollow place where her tongue had been and rose up over the whole churning field, a keening, wavering, terrible, and beautiful note that cut through the noise of war the way a blade cuts through cloth. And every wolf on that field heard it. And every wolf on that field stopped. Roan's great gray wolf released Dax and swung its head toward her, gold eyes wild and uncomprehending. Lieutenant Dawes froze in the middle of a swing. Dax himself, bleeding from the shoulder, staggered back and stared. 200 wolves and 40 riders, all of them in the middle of a battle, turned toward the small barefoot figure in the wolf fur cloak who had just made the first sound anyone had ever heard her make. Wren clapped both hands over her mouth. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, a silence with snow falling into it. And then, deep inside her, the sleeping thing woke all the way up. It did not stretch. It did not yawn. It did not unfold gently the way the stories said a wolf came to its rider for the first time. It detonated. Wren felt her spine arch back, felt her vision go white, felt her skin split along lines she had not known were there. And for one terrible, blinding, incandescent moment, she was two things at once. a mute, starving Omega who had never shifted in 23 winters, and something else, something that had been curled in the marrow of her bones her whole life, waiting, patient as stone, for a single reason to come out. And then the cloak fell empty to the snow, and where the girl had stood, there was a wolf. She was white, not the pure white of fresh snow, off-white, the white of old ivory, of weathered bone, of the snow she had spent her whole life leaving prints in. She was smaller than Roan's great gray wolf, much smaller, but she was lean and quick and silent, and when she landed on the churned and bloody snow of the battlefield, she left no track. None. Not a single print. Wren stood on the snow the way a bird stands on water, her weight spread so perfectly, so instinctively, that the surface did not so much as dimple beneath her. She took a step, and the snow did not know she had been there. She took another, moving out across the field, and behind her the white ground stayed smooth and unbroken, as if the wolf walking across it were made of nothing but cold light and memory. 200 wolves watched a white wolf walk through a battlefield without leaving a mark. And something old and animal in every one of them understood, before their minds could catch up, exactly what they were looking at. Roan's great gray wolf came toward her slowly, the massive head lowered until his muzzle was level with hers. He breathed against her white fur, and she felt the heat of it, and she felt the bond between them at last for what it truly was. Not a thread, not a chain, not any of the metaphors the stories used. It was a sound, a frequency, the exact frequency she had been living on her whole silent life, the one no one had ever been able to hear. And he heard it. He had always heard it. She pressed her white forehead against his great gray one, and the two of them stood there in the falling snow, in the dead center of a stopped war, and the thing that passed between them needed no voice at all. The blackthorn began to retreat, not because anyone ordered them to. There was no order. Their alpha was on the ground bleeding, and their charge was broken, and their dead lay thick in the throat of the gully. But that was not why they pulled back. They pulled back because of what they saw. An alpha king and a trackless wolf standing together on a field of war, and some deep collective animal knowledge in all of them recognized that this was not a fight any of them could win. Dax dragged himself up onto two legs. He shifted back into the shape of a man, bleeding freely from the wound in his shoulder, his face gray with pain and with something else, something that looked almost like fear. And he stared at the small white wolf standing on the unbroken snow, and he said, loud enough for the whole field to hear, "That is a ghost walker." The word went across the battlefield like wind through grass. Wren felt it land in the watching wolves, felt the way they drew back from it. And she did not understand it, but Dax did, and Dax kept talking, his voice shaking. "I have never seen one," he said. "Not in my whole life. My grandfather spoke of them when he was very old, the old bloodline. The ones who could walk any ground and leave nothing behind. He said the last of them died 200 winters ago. He said they were gone out of the world." He looked at her, and there was something almost like reverence in his ruined face. He said they were extinct. Roan shifted back beside her. He stood naked in the snow, covered in blood that was mostly not his own, and he did not look at Dax. He looked at the small white wolf who had been a mute, starving Omega an hour before, who had saved this valley 3 times in the dark, and would now save it once more in the open, in the full light of day, where every single creature on that field could see her. His voice came out quiet and certain, and it carried, "Not extinct," he said. "Sleeping." And then he looked around the stopped battlefield, at the broken blackthorn and the staring iron fang and the wolves of Greywater who had spent her whole life pretending she did not exist, and he let his words fall on all of them at once. "You have all of you been walking past a legend," he said, "for 23 winters. You cut out her voice. You fed her broth. You called her nothing, and you let her save your lives in the dark, and never once turned your faces to see who was doing it." He gestured to the white wolf standing on snow that held no print. "Look now," he said. "Look while you still have the chance, because she will not stay in your closet any longer. She is the last of the ghost walkers, and she is my Luna. And from this hour, the whole North will learn the name of the woman this house tried so hard to make invisible." The snow fell. The white wolf stood on it, leaving nothing behind. And Wren, who had spent her entire life believing she was a thing the world had thrown away, looked out across a battlefield full of warriors who had stopped fighting simply to look at her, and understood all at once, with the cold, clean certainty of fresh snow, that she had never been nothing. She had only been unread. And now, at last, in the full light of day, with the bond humming in her bones, and a king standing at her side, and 200 enemies bowing back from the sight of her, that night, with the fire burning high and the smell of pine resin and blood and melting snow filling the study, Roan told her what she was. She was on the rug by the hearth because the soft bed was still too soft and the floor was a compromise her body could accept. She had shifted back hours before, and the shift had left her shaking and hollow and ravenous in a way she had never known. And now she was eating bread and cheese with both hands, alternating bites, and Roan was watching her eat with an expression that suggested he could happily watch her do it for the rest of his life. "Long ago," he said, "before the packs were organized, before the kings and the borders and the wars over them, there were wolves who served a different purpose. Not hunters, not fighters. They were called the Ghost Walkers." Wren paused with the bread halfway to her mouth. "They could move across any ground without leaving a trace," he said. "They could read any track ever made by any creature, and they could lay down a false one so perfect that no tracker alive could tell it from the truth. They were the eyes of the old wolf nations, the map makers, the ones who learned where the enemy was before the enemy knew it himself." He leaned back, the firelight moving over the old scars on his arms. "They won wars," he said, "before the first claw was ever drawn, and both sides wanted them so badly and feared them so completely that during the long pack wars, they were hunted almost out of the world. Neither side could bear the thought of the other one having them. The last known ghost walker died 200 winters ago. The bloodline was called extinct." He looked at her. "It was not extinct," he said. "It was sleeping. In the marrow of a girl no one ever thought to look at twice." Wren set down the bread. She reached for the charcoal and the small slate she kept near her now, and she wrote, "I never knew what I was. No one did." She paused, then wrote more. Slow. "A ghost walker whose wolf never woke, in a pack that cut out her tongue so she could not speak. They buried me alive, and I still saved them. 80 lives, built with my bare hands, in the dark. Roan read it, and something moved in his face. Why, he said quietly, after everything they did, why did you keep saving them? It was the question she had asked herself 1,000 times in the cold, and she had always given herself the same hard answer, the one grown in the closet under the stairs. She wrote it now, almost without thinking, because if they died, there would be no one left to ignore me. Even cruelty needs an audience. Roan read it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and he did not pretend they were not. That is what you told yourself, he said gently, to survive. And it kept you alive, so I will not say a single word against it. But I do not think it was true. She looked at him. I think, he said, that you kept saving them because you could not stand by and let a thing be destroyed when you had the power to save it. Even a thing that had wronged you. Even a thing that did not deserve you. I think you are simply built that way, all the way down, and no closet and no cruelty and no severed voice could carve it out of you. They tried. They tried for 23 winters, and they failed. He reached over and rested one scarred hand lightly over her small one. You did not save them because you needed an audience, he said. You saved them because you are the best of what a wolf can be. And you were that even when not one of them deserved to witness it. Wren sat very still by the fire, and something in her, some final knot she had carried so long she no longer felt it as pain, only as the shape of herself, began, slowly, to come undone. Because he had reached past the story she told to survive, and found the truth underneath it that she had never once let herself believe. She picked up the charcoal. Her hand was not quite steady. Come with me, Roan said before she could write, not because of the bond, not because of what you are. I crossed the whole north following a trail in the snow. And that trail was the most intelligent, most creative, most stubbornly alive thing I have ever encountered, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning the mind that made it. She held the charcoal a moment longer. Then she wrote one word, yes. And underneath it, because some new light thing had woken in her along with the wolf, she wrote a second line, but I still want my own desk. And Roan laughed again, that rough, unpolished, startled laugh, and the sound of it filled the warm room and spilled out under the door into a house that had never once heard joy come from anywhere near her. And Wren sat in the firelight with breadcrumbs on her chin and tears on her face and thought, with a wonder she had no words for, This is what it sounds like when someone finally hears you. He had wanted to take her away worst. He had wanted to carry her back to his own stronghold, give her time, let her settle into a life with no closets and no broth, and no counted lentils before he asked anything of her. She overruled him. She wrote it in small, fierce letters and held it up to his face. Do it here. Do it where they made me nothing. Do it where they can see. He read it, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, You are going to be a terrifying queen. And there was nothing in his voice but pride. So they held the ceremony in the courtyard, in the snow, in the gray light of the morning after the battle, with the valley quiet and the dead carried away, and the whole of it gone clean and white and still. The pack assembled in rings, the wolves of Greywater and the riders of the Iron Fang together, filling the courtyard that had been built for far fewer. Orin stood in the back row, stripped of his rank, an old wolf with the look of a man watching his own life turn to dust in his hands. Halden was there, still bound, flanked by 2 guards. Della was there. The 2 young Omegas were there, near the front, where they could see. And Ren stood in the center of it all, barefoot. She had refused shoes. She wanted her feet on the snow, on the ground, on the cold earth she had crossed 1,000 times in the dark, leaving trails that no one followed until the one wolf who could read them finally came. She stood where they had made her nothing, and she put her bare feet on the snow. And the snow did not break beneath her, because she was a ghost walker now, and the whole world could see it. Under the wolf fur cloak, she wore a plain dress of dark wool, the first garment in years that she had not stolen from an animal. It fit. It was warm. It had pockets, which she found, for reasons she could not explain, almost unbearably moving. Roan stood before her in his full armor, the blood cleaned away, or most of it. There was a streak of it along his jaw that he had missed. She reached up, in front of all of them, and wiped it away with her thumb, and the small, unhurried intimacy of that gesture made the whole courtyard go silent. He spoke the old words, the ancient binding words, in the formal tongue, his voice low and certain. She could not speak them back. He had known she could not. He had spent these days learning to read her hands, her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. So when the moment came for her consent, he did not wait for a voice that had been taken from her before she was old enough to remember its sound. He looked at her, and he asked, and she placed both her hands flat against his chest, over the drum of his heart, and she pressed. "Yes," the pressure said. "Yes, I choose this. With everything that was ever taken from me, with the only voice I have left, I choose this." He marked her. The bite came on the left side of her neck, just above the collarbone, and it was not the soft, symbolic pressure she had half expected. It was real. His teeth in her skin, her blood in his mouth, and the bond between them closing like a door that had stood open her entire life. A door she had never known was letting in the cold. The pain lasted the length of a breath. The warmth lasted. It spread from the mark down through her chest and into her belly and down her legs and into her bare feet on the snow. And for the first time in her whole remembered life, her feet were not cold. And then she did the thing that surprised them all. She marked him back. No one expected it, perhaps least of all Roan, but the bond asks for both, and Ren had spent 23 winters having things done to her, decided for her, taken from her, and she was finished forever, with being only the one things happened to. She rose onto her toes. He bent his knees to meet her, and she set her teeth into the scarred side of his throat, right over the old white line where someone, long ago, had tried to open it with a dull blade, and she tasted his blood, hot and bright and tasting of copper and cedar, and his wolf made the recognition sound again, the low rolling vibration from the kitchen, the one that meant, "I know you. I have always known you. I crossed the whole north to find you." The bond closed in both directions. 2 creatures, each marked by the other. Neither of them Ever again, only the one it was done to. Then Roan turned to face the assembled pack, and he did not raise his voice, because he did not need to. "This is Ren," he said. "She is my Luna." The courtyard was utterly still. "She is the last of the ghost walkers," he said. "She saved this pack 3 times over, in the dark, with her bare hands, while every one of you slept warm and fed, and never once wondered who stood between you and the enemy. She cannot speak. She does not need to. You will learn to listen with your eyes the way I learned to. Or you will answer to me." His gaze moved to Halden. The Gamma was staring at the ground. "Halden of Greywater," Roan said. "You are sentenced to serve the Luna's command for the remainder of your natural life. You will build what she designs. You will maintain what she creates. You will reinforce the very ravine she once fell into and broke her wrist in, and you will make it whole, and you will tend it through every winter you have left." He paused. "And you will do all of it," he said, "knowing that every trap, every false trail, every defense that has ever protected this valley was conceived by the woman you tied to a post and left in the cold. If you ever falter in that service, I will return to the simpler sentence. Do you understand?" Halden lifted his head. He looked at Ren, and she met his eyes and held them, and she thought of the apple, and the small girl on the kitchen floor, and the long years of pain that came after. And she decided, clearly and on purpose, that she could hold both of those things in her mind at once without either one canceling out the other. That was a thing she was only now learning she was allowed to do. She nodded once. Halden's chin dropped to his chest, and he wept. And it was not a performance, and she let him. Roan turned to Orin. The old Alpha was trembling. "You allowed a child in your care to be mutilated," Roan said. "Starved. Brutalized. You were the Alpha. It was your one sacred duty to protect every wolf under your roof, and you failed in the most fundamental way an Alpha can fail. I am stripping this pack of its name as your own," he said. "Greywater will stand from this day as a holding of the Iron Fang. You will live, not because you have earned it, but because my Luna has shown me that survival inside the truth of what you have done can be a heavier sentence than any quick end. And I have learned to trust her judgment above my own." Ren felt the weight of every eye in the courtyard settle on her. She stood in it. She stood in it the way she stood on snow, distributing the pressure so perfectly, so evenly, that nothing in her broke. Before they rode out, she went back to the kitchen. She went alone. Roan let her, though she could feel the low hum of his wolf through the bond, the part of him that did not want her out of his sight even now. She felt it, and she loved it, and she went anyway, because some things a person has to finish by herself. Della was at the stove. She looked up when Ren came in, and her worn face did something complicated, something that had no single name. Ren did not write anything. There was nothing left to write. She took a bowl down from the shelf. She filled it with stew from the pot, the real stew, the one with chunks of meat and potato and thick brown gravy. She set it on the table. Then she took down a second bowl, and she filled it with broth. Thin broth. The kind she had eaten every day of her life. She carried both bowls to where Della stood, and she set them down side by side on the counter. Della looked at the 2 bowls. She looked at Ren. Ren pointed at the stew. Then she pointed at the corner of the kitchen where the young Omegas had always eaten, out of the way, out of sight. Then she made a single gesture with both hands, palms turning up and opening outward, a gesture that meant everything, all of them, the whole table, for everyone, always, from this day on. Della's eyes filled. She nodded, and then Wren picked up the bowl of thin broth, and she carried it to the drain, and she poured it out. She watched it swirl and thin and vanish. 3 small lentils spinning slowly down into the dark. 3. The exact measure of everything they had ever told her she was worth. She watched them disappear, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel grief. She felt the quiet, settling certainty of a door closing on a room she would never have to enter again. Then she set the empty bowl in the basin, and she rested one hand for a moment against Della's arm, the woman who had counted lentils in the dark for a reason no one ever saw. And she walked out of that kitchen for the last time. The riders were waiting in the courtyard. A horse too large for her. A wolf too large for the world. A bond humming louder in her bones than any howl she could ever have made. She climbed into the saddle. She settled the cloak around her shoulders, and she looked back once at the pack house, at the small low window beneath the stairs, behind which she had slept for so many winters, in the dark, in the cold, counting the things she was told she was. The winter light caught the glass and threw it back at her like a small, cold, distant star. She looked at it, and then she turned away. Roan brought his horse alongside hers. Their knees touched. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, and she let him, and his fingers wrapped warm and rough all the way around hers. She turned his hand palm up, and with the tip of one finger, slowly, the way she had taught herself to speak into the empty air when there was no paper and no one to read it, she traced 4 letters against his skin. H. He went still, watching her hand. O-M-E, home, he said softly. She closed his fingers over the word, the way he had once closed his fist over thank you in the dark, holding it safe inside his hand, where nothing could blow it away. Then they rode south through the birches, the whole long line of them. Behind them, the snow held only the deep, heavy prints of war horses and the lighter tracks of ordinary wolves. Her own horse left tracks like all the rest, but Wren, when she closed her eyes and felt the bond humming in her marrow and the ghost of her wolf turning slow and easy in her chest, knew that whenever she chose to, she could walk across all the white country ahead of them and leave nothing behind at all. Nothing but the faint, clean smell of cedar and the memory of a silence finally broken. The wind picked up. The birches bent. The snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the old tracks, the false ones and the true ones, the trails that had led enemies to their doom, and the single barefoot trail that had once led a king to his mate. Within an hour, the whole valley would be clean and white and unwritten again, a blank page. But Wren was done with blank pages. She had a desk waiting for her, somewhere south, in a stronghold she had never seen. She had maps to draw that no one had dared to draw in 200 winters. She had traps to design and a kingdom to learn, and 1,000 things to say at last to a world that was finally going to have to learn how to listen with its eyes. She had a wolf who left no print, and a king who read every mark she made as if it were a letter written in a language only the two of them would ever speak. She pressed her face into the fur of the cloak, and she breathed in cedar and iron and the cold, clean snow, and the horse carried her south, and the king rode close beside her, and the wind erased everything behind them. And for the first time in 23 winters, Wren's feet were warm, and the silence she carried was no longer a wound. It was simply hers. A quiet she had chosen to keep in a life she had finally been allowed to choose. The truest thing she had learned in the end was this: a voice is not the only way a soul can speak, and a person is never, ever worth only what the cruelest room they ever lived in decided to call them. She had always been the last of the ghost walkers. It only took the right pair of eyes to finally read her.